Hello, everybody, again. Welcome to Making Meaning Through Modern Midrash. How's that for alliteration? I'm so happy to have everybody here, and we have a three-part class, three-session class on Midrash. And, we're coming at this with, I know a lot of you have a lot of knowledge about Midrash and text study, and some of you could even teach this class. But we are going to come at it from a more beginner perspective and move forward from there. I just want to say, first of all, I'm grateful that you're here and that you want to study together and that you're interested in Midrash, because Midrash is my favorite kind of text. And I really want to share that love of Midrash with you. So just to start, I want to tell you what the three sessions are going to look like. And, if you miss a session, like I said, we'll record it and you can pick it up whenever you're available to watch it. So today we're going to do a session on what is Midrash. We're going to be looking at more traditional texts, the Midrash of the rabbis, the ancient rabbis. On Thursday, we have a very, very special guest joining us. Her name is Rabbi Rachel Biermann, and she's a friend of mine that I met through the Women's Rabbinic Network. And she has been involved in a 3-year project called Midrashic Monologues, where she and another rabbi, she'll tell us more about it, have been writing modern midrash. So we'll talk about what modern midrash is. It's not the midrash of the ancient rabbis, it's the midrash of the modern rabbis. Pretty straightforward. And then we're going to learn from Rachel, and I've done some of my own writing on midrash, and I'll share some of that with you. And then next week we have your midrashim. So I'm hoping that over the weekend you'll try your hand at writing a little bit. They do not have to be long, involved essays. They can be little short paragraphs, but just to try your hand at midrash. And so next week we'll hear from you. So that's sort of the plan for the 3 sessions. And I'll take any questions just to start, and then we can jump in. So does anybody have any questions? Nope. Okay, great. Feel free to interrupt at any time. This is as if we were sitting around a table in the library, only we get a few people from out of town, including my mom, who's here joining us. And so her camera's not on. It's only 9:00 in the morning in Seattle. So, but she's here, and it's really great to see all these familiar faces. And I have to tell you that I was actually a little nervous coming into it. I don't know why. I've taught Midrash 1,000 times, and to you, so I don't know why, but seeing your faces just makes this all the more fun. So I'm looking forward. Okay, so we will get started. Your grands are here. I don't know what that means, Anita. Does that mean your grandkids are at your house? Okay, they can learn too. So we're going to talk first of all about what is Midrash. So let's try and make this as interactive as possible that Zoom will allow. I will start by giving you a basic definition that Midrash comes from the Hebrew word lidrosh, which with its root dalid reshin, which means to interpret, to investigate, to consult, to inquire, to ask, to expound upon. That's sort of what it means. You might have heard the word drash before, which would be to we use it in conversational English all the time in rabbinic circles. Like I'm writing a drash on the Torah portion, meaning a short interpretation of the Torah portion, a devar Torah, as it were. But so that's where the word comes from: to investigate, look into, expand upon, interpret. Interpret's a really good definition. Okay, so recognize that that's what the word means. What is Midrash? Midrash is 2 things. Number 1, it is the genre of literature that grew out of this practice of interpretation. We'll say from about, these are iffy numbers, but let's say 400 to about 1200. and onward, right? It continued. But if we're going to look at what the genre, the body of literature for Midrash is, it's really about those 800 years. Yes, there was Midrash earlier, and yes, there was Midrash later, and they came in different forms. Okay. So it's the body of literature, but it's also the individual piece of interpretation, right? So like the one Midrash that speaks about a specific text. So that's also Midrash. Okay. So one way, so first of all, yes, if you don't mind muting, that would be terrific. It looks like almost everybody's muted. Rhonda, do you mind if I just mute you? I'm going to mute you. And Renee, I'm going to mute you. And Pat. Okay. So if you want to speak, you'll have to unmute yourselves. Okay. So I like to look at Midrash in a way that was explained to me early on in my rabbinic studies. And that is that when you look at a page of text, you see a bunch of black letters on the page. And so actually, I wish I do over there. This is a weird part about recording is I'm going to get up and run away real fast. Here's a Torah commentary, the Women's Torah Commentary. With my background on, it might be hard to see. Oh, that's not a good page to show you. All right. I pick a random Torah, random portion, which actually is close to this week's Torah portion. So we'll just go to this week's Torah portion. So you see, oh, now I have to turn off my background. Hold on one second. Now you see my real house, which isn't bad. All right. So do you guys recognize this Torah portion? You actually don't have to look at the words if you just look at the shape on the page. So Cindy and Sheila are nodding. Rick is nodding. Put it in the chat. What is it?
Michamocha is in there. I know that.
It is in there. Can you see the words?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the Song of the Sea. All right. This week is Shabbat Shirah, which is the, right, Sheila, the Song of the Sea. So this week is the Torah portion where the Israelites have left slavery. They've crossed the sea and they sing this song. Okay. And so this Shabbat that we read this Torah portion is called Shabbat Shirah, the Sabbath of song. So anyway, I happen to open to that. What you see are these black letters on the page. That's the Torah text, right? And there's 54 portions. We have a long Torah. There's lots of text. What's the Midrash? The Midrash is all the white space around the black letters. Okay. It's the space here. I'll pick a different portion that's maybe easier to see. Just like pages, Hebrew, 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 Hebrew. The text is the black letters. The Midrash is the white space around it. It's all the stuff that's missing from the text. So our Torah text is written in a very like the word I think of is terse, like a very simple way. It gives you the bare facts, the bare information, but the analysis, the interpretation, the feeling, the connection to the text, that's the space around the black letters. So you have to have the white space in order to see the black letters. Okay, so that's the Midrash. That's what we interpret. That's what we bring to the text and what our ancient rabbis brought to the text to be able to interpret it. Okay, so are there any questions so far?
Do they interpret everything?
Yeah, I got you, Marilyn. Did they interpret everything? They pretty much did. Pause for a moment. Does anybody have Ellie's? Hold on, Ellie's email. I need to send her the Zoom link. Hold on. I think I got it right here. No. Ariana, do you mind sending Ellie? I don't know which Ellie this is. The Zoom link. Can you send me the Zoom link and then I can send it to her? Thank you. Or just put it in the chat and then I'll get it. Okay. So, did they interpret everything? The answer is yes. I think they did interpret everything. I mean, obviously there are passages that don't have commentary on them, but I think over the course of, nearly 3,000 years, yes, the answer is yes. And they didn't, and I'm going to get to you about the kinds of midrashim in a moment. Hold on, let me send the same link. Okay, thank you so much for the help. Okay, so there's different kinds of midrashim, and that's actually really important. So we have something called exegetical midrashim, homiletical midrashim, halachic midrashim, agadic midrashim. Now that might just sound like a lot of blah, 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 you don't understand. Let's go through what each one is. Exegetical midrashim basically is a exegesis of the text. It's a line by line, phrase by phrase, word by word interpretation of text. And it's a more simplistic is probably not the right word, but maybe it is to help you understand the text. So it is like they'll take a line of Torah and expound upon that line, or one word of Torah and expound upon that word. Okay, that's called exegetical, and you're going to get like a paragraph. You'll get like a paragraph of text to explain that section, and I've got some of those today to share with you. Homiletical midrashim is taking several verses and making that into more of a sermon. And so we like to think of sermons as sort of a modern day invention, right? Hold on one second. All of a sudden I'm losing my voice. That's weird. We like to think of sermons as more modern day invention, something that we kind of came up with in the last several hundred years. But the reality is, back in the day, the rabbis gave sermons too. And they would take these verses from Torah and expound upon them and made them into sermons, homilies. They're called homiletical midrashim. They weren't necessarily based on a specific verse, and they didn't always follow so easily. So you couldn't say this paragraph of midrash goes directly to this line. It might be a much more complicated interpretation. Okay, but think of it as a sermon. Halachic midrashim. So we like to think often of midrash as stories and tales and fantasies of the rabbis, and many of them are. In fact, the first one I want to share with you really is. It's my favorite one. But sometimes law comes out of the midrash, and so these halachic midrashim are laws are derived from this midrash, or the midrash explicates upon the law. So let's use an example. I'm just going to mute whoever that is. Milk and meat, for example. What does it say in the Torah? It says you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk, but it doesn't tell you to have two sets of dishes. It doesn't tell you to separate your milk and meat. It doesn't tell you not to, I don't know, whatever other things you need to do. I'm thinking of Baba Mises that aren't really halachic, so I don't want to share those. But anyway, so the midrash and commentaries and later codes come out of this to be able to explicate what's written in the Torah. And that's actually a really key point is that for midrash, you have to have a footing in the Torah. So remember I said the white space around the black letters. You have to be connected to the actual Torah. But once you're connected, even if it's just one letter, you can just go as far afield as your imagination will take you, right? So you'll see when we look at some of the midrash that that the rabbis go a little wild, and you sort of have to wonder what they were thinking when they wrote some of these things. But some of it is much more mainstream, and frankly, some of it we've taken as Torah, and we'll look at that as well today. Okay. So halachic midrashim mostly based in the book of Leviticus, because that's all of the sacrificial information. And then the agadic midrashim. Agadic midrashim are stories. And agadah, you've probably heard that term before. And so these are the fantasy, I like to say the fantasies of the rabbis. Okay, but again, based in text. You can't just go wild and create some fairy tale and say that's a midrash. It has to have some footing in the text. Okay, let's pause for a second and see if there's any questions. No? Okay. Okay, good. All right. So I want to look at some text. So I'm going to give you a link. It's in the chat. If you want to follow the text on your own computer, you can just move our screen over to the side and open the Safari link. And so you'll have the text with you on the computer. You can have two windows open side by side. If you don't want to go that route and you just want to watch on the screen, I'm going to share my screen and we'll go from there. Okay, so. All right, can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. So making meaning through modern midrash, through isn't in there. Making meaning through modern midrash, favorites and familiar. Okay. So we're gonna start with a favorite. And I hope you like it. It's definitely, I learned this text when I was in rabbinical school. I've never forgotten it. That was a lot of years ago. I was in Israel in 1995. So we're going on 26 years. And I've never forgotten this text. I have forgotten other texts, but not this one. Okay. So it's based on a line of Torah. And if you want to follow along in the Torah, you can, but it's right here. It's from Genesis 21. And so we are at the point where, do you remember the story? Here, I'm going to unshare for a second. Well, here, look at the text and then I'll unshare and then we'll come back. So the text is this. Oh, I was going to highlight it. I can't highlight it. Okay. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children? Yet I have borne a son in his old age. Okay. There's so much in this text. What do you do when you want to understand a text? You start asking questions of the text. The rabbis would say, what is the difficulty with this text? What's the question of the text? The word they use is koshi, the difficulty, and then the question. So let's ask that question of each other. What's the difficulty with this text? So remember where the context from where it comes. Sarah was barren. She did not have any children. Do you guys remember the story? Here, let me unshare. Hold on. Do you remember the story of Sarah?
She's old.
She's old. She's really old. At this point, she's really old. So Sarah marries Abraham. We're going to go with a really short version. She can't have children. 10 years have gone by in their marriage. She can't have any children. She has a handmaid, Hagar. She asks Hagar to be the surrogate for her. And so Hagar gets pregnant. She has a baby. His name is Ishmael. Stuff happens before she has the baby. We'll get there eventually. And Sarah gets Sarah's jealous. She throws Hagar out. And then, so that's done. And then what happens? Actually, that's not what happens yet. Sarah has a son.
Yeah.
Hagar has a son. Sarah is visited by 3 angels.
Right.
They say she's going to get pregnant. She's an old woman by this point. Okay, so she gets pregnant. She has a child. They name him Isaac. Okay, that's where we are in the text. So now let's go back. And we're going to ask the question. Oh, wrong screen. Hold on. Stop sharing. This is why I don't really want to put anything on YouTube. All right. Okay, so here's the text. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children, yet I have borne a son in his old age? All right, what are the questions that we should be asking of this text? Feel free to unmute and ask. Pretend like we're sitting around the table in the library. But you do have to unmute.
Who is the who?
Who is the who? Excellent. Okay. So
who is the she?
Who is the he? Who is the who and who is the he? I should write these down. These are good questions.
Who is the she? And
Who is the what? I can't hear.
Who is the she? And she added, not he.
Oh, okay.
And how can a son have a baby in his old age?
No, his old age refers to Abraham's old
Abraham,
age.
right? Yeah.
So it's funny because we're talking about Abraham's old age, but it's really Sarah's old age that we're concerned about. So that's a little like question you might want to ask, like, why are we talking about Abraham's old age? Men can have children their whole lives, right? But women, they're limited in how long they can have children. So so that's a question, his old age, but it does refer to Abraham in this case. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, I'm trying to find the text and I'm going way past it. Hold on one second.
Who is she talking to?
Very good question. So it's not coronavirus time, so they did interact with other people. But it's a very good question as who's she talking to? All right. So the line before it, just so you get it, is Sarah said, God has brought me laughter. All who hear will laugh with me. And she added, who would have dared to say to Abraham, Sarah shall nurse children, yet I have borne a son in his old age. Okay, so okay. So let's look at the midrash. What are the questions? We'll ask, what is the question that the rabbis were trying to answer? Okay, so this is one of my favorite. It's an exegetical midrash. It's from a compilation called Genesis Rabbah. Midrash Rabbah is a whole collection of midrashim. Okay, and she said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should give children suck, meaning that she could nurse children? Our mother Sarah, this is a part of a longer midrash. Our mother Sarah was extremely modest. Said Abraham to her, this is not a time for modesty, but uncover your breast so that all may know the Holy One, blessed be God, has begun to perform miracles. Sorry. She uncovered her breast and the milk gushed forth as from two fountains. And noble ladies came and had their children suckled by her, saying, we do not merit that our children should be suckled with the milk of that righteous woman. Okay, how is it that this is a midrash that I remember from rabbinic school? Well, I think it's the fact that suddenly Sarah's breasts became like fountains and milk spurted forth from them in the most miraculous way. All of your questions are the questions that the rabbis were asking. Who was she talking to? Well, what's not written in this text, earlier in the text, is all the women of the town are gadding about talking, because I guess that's what they did and still do. How could Sarah really have given birth to a child? She's 90 years old, right? She can't give birth. So she can't get pregnant. She probably took another child from somewhere else and just said it was her child. Like, frankly, before, don't forget, she had a child, a surrogate with Hagar being the surrogate. And why not do that again? Right? This wasn't Sarah's baby. This could not have happened. And so that's one question. Who were they talking to? Is when she says, oh, I did it again. I'm going to just close this document. I don't need this document. When she says, who is she talking to? Well, she's speaking, sorry, the phone's ringing. She's speaking like as if to like respond to this gossip that's going on in the neighborhood, saying, how could Sarah have a child? Sorry, give me a second. Phone is now in the other room. Okay, so she's speaking as if to say to the gossipers in the neighborhood,
Mind your own.
who would have said that Sarah couldn't nurse? Well, look. And so Abraham says to her, this is not a time for modesty, because Sarah is the most modest woman, a very, very modest woman, extremely modest, it says in our translation. But this is not a time for modesty. Uncover your breasts and show them what you've got, what's happening to you.
In
And
other words,
so
God can do whatever he wants.
I guess so. So these women who were gossiping now are saying, wow, we don't even merit for our children to be nursed by this woman because she's such a woman of valor or such a noble woman. So, so you understand why I like this text. Also, you understand sort of the fantasy of the rabbis, not because of the large breasts that are made from the milk fountains, but so who knows, frankly, the rabbis were men. There's no way to say that there wasn't like part of it. I wouldn't want to say that it wasn't part of it, because frankly it could be, but which is actually kind of funny. I've never actually said that out loud, and never really thought about it before, but frankly, who knows?
We men are men.
But I
Some
think
things
it's this
never
idea, this like crazy idea, the idea that she had to prove, first of all, prove herself to the women of the town,
Mhm.
prove that this child was really her child, even at 90 years old. And there are other texts that show us that maybe part of the miracle was God took this 90-year-old woman and made her as if she were like 20, meaning she became fertile and able to have children. And so, different kinds of miracles could have happened there. But you kind of get a little bit of the thought process of what these rabbis are doing. So they look at the original text, they ask the question, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children? Who would have said that she would nurse children? Well, you got these ladies in the town who are talking about it. And I think it's interesting that they're talking about Abraham. This is about Sarah. And the last line is, yet I have borne a son in his old age. So that might ask you, well, am I old? Am I Sarah old? Maybe I am like a 20-year-old to give birth. So maybe that's where some of that came from as well. I'm not sure. So I wanted to share with you one of my favorites, and that is that. Now I wanted to look to a couple of other texts. And if you have any questions or anything, feel free to enter, to unmute and ask them. Okay. This is a text that's familiar to many of us. This is about this week's Torah portion, about the splitting of the sea. It comes from Exodus 14:15. If you happen to have a Torah commentary with you, you can open it and follow along. You don't have to, it's right here. Exodus 14. I'm in the wrong book. Okay, Exodus 14. The people have made it to the sea. The 10 plagues have happened. It's they get to the sea.
You can't have grapes. Mm-mm.
Diane, I need you to mute.
Hmm?
I need you to mute. One second. I'm going to mute you guys, the people who aren't muted. Okay. Okay, who has a dog? You're not muted. Okay, I'm going to unmute you. Okay. Okay. All right, so this is this week's Torah portion. They've made it out of Egypt. They're standing at the sea. The Egyptians are coming from behind, right? And there's no place to go. And so what happens? Well, we know what happens because it's a prayer in our prayer book, and we talk about it all the time. It's not in the Torah. I'm going to read you the actual text. The text says, so they're standing at the sea. Have no fear, Moses says. Stand by and witness the deliverance with God, which God will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today you will never see again. God will battle for you. Hold your peace. Then God said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. Lift up your rod, hold out your arm over the sea and split it so the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground, etc., etc., etc. And he held out his arm over the sea, and God drove back the sea with a strong east wind, and all that night, and turned the sea into dry ground, and the waters were split. Okay, that's the miracle. Does it say anything about that famous guy Nachshon? No, it doesn't. Nachshon's not in here at all in this story. And yet, when we talk about the splitting of the sea, we talk about this guy Nachshon ben Aminadav, the son of Aminadav, who plunged headlong into the sea, right? And he walked into the sea and it came up to his toes. And he walked into the sea and it came up to his knees. And he kept going into the sea and it was at his stomach. And then it was at his shoulders. And then it was at his neck. And then it was at his chin. And then it finally came up to his nose. And when it came up to his nose, that's when the sea split. Okay? But that's not in the Torah. That's a midrash. And it's not even that common of a midrash. It's a great story, and it's something that's become very popular in recent years. It's actually sort of hard to find. It's not in mainstream midrash that I could find. It's in a compilation, compilation of midrashim where they've taken midrash from different places and put them into like a story form. Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael on Parshat B'Shalach, so the story is the tribes are standing there arguing. I'm not going to go into the sea first. No. I'm not going to go into the sea first. You go into the sea first. So it says, and one said, I'm not going to go first into the sea, as it says. This is a text from the book of Hosea. Ephraim has surrounded me with lies, and the house of Israel with deceit. So I'm not going into that. I don't trust it. Since they, Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, were standing and talking and taking advice and debating and arguing over what course of action they should take, Nachshon ben Aminadav jumped into the Red Sea and he fell into the sea. And the pasuk says, the text says, "Save me, O God, for water has come up to my soul." So it doesn't say anything about noses or shoulders or stomachs or knees, but to my soul. And he said, I have sunk in muddy depths and there's no place to stand. I have come into the deep water and the current has swept me away. Both of these from the books of Psalms. Okay. So the way a midrash is put together is it's based on the original text. You have the story, and then there's often what's called a proof text, a text from another part of the Torah or Bible to prove what you are saying. And in this case, it comes from the book of Psalms saying, "Save me, O God, for water has come up to my soul." Okay. So we've got the same text, a little different. Nachshon jumped into the Red Sea and his tribe followed him into the sea. Therefore, he merited to have the kingdom, as it is said, when Israel left Egypt, the house of Yaakov, Jacob left a people of strange tongue. Yehuda became his holy nation. Okay, again from Psalms. Okay, so we have both of these texts in two compilations, one from the Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael and one from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, but not Bereshit Rabbah. Shemot Rabbah. It's not a from like kind of mainstream midrash. It is kind of these anthologies, the word I'm thinking of, anthologies of midrashim. And Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer has some wonderful stories as well. So this text where we ask the questions, how did they have the faith to go into the sea? And our answer is always, there was one guy, his name was Nachshon, and he just did it. That's a midrash. And I'll tell you the other midrash, I think it's on my page. Let me just check real fast. It may not be. I was talking to Rabbi Gordon about it yesterday, so I don't remember if no, I did not. Okay. Another midrash that we often think is part of the Torah, but is a midrash. You know, when the Israelites get through the sea and they're dancing and they're singing and everybody's happy, and God says to them, "Why are you singing when my children are dying? My children are drowning. The Egyptians are my children too." Do you know that story? Is that familiar to you?
Mhm.
It's not in the Torah. It's a midrash. I always thought in my mind, I just always thought I knew it so well. I always thought that God says, why are you celebrating when my children are dying too? And it's not there. So that's another, I'll take you to another one where that's the case. And that's the story of Abraham and the idols. You know that story? We do. We all know the story. And I have it in the text and I'll show it to you. But remember, Abraham's father, Terah, is an idol maker. And Abraham thinks that's ridiculous. How can you pray to clay? And the clay can't be a god. And there's a whole story which we'll look at momentarily. And we teach our kids this in kindergarten and first grade and second grade. Like we learn the story that we don't make idols, that we believe in one God. And Abraham was the first to believe in one God. That whole idol story made up. It's midrash. Let's look at the text. Oh, somebody chatted something. Let me see what it is. Oh, Karen wants to say something. You are welcome to say something. What would you like to say?
I was going to add that when I was in choir, we were taught that when they did the singing, that it's in a minor key. So they really wanted to make it obvious that it was God was sad. So they didn't lose out on that bit, which I thought was, a kind thing.
Are you talking about the Micha Mocha, the song at the sea is in a minor key? Interesting. I want to look into that.
Well, that's what we were taught in choir. So it's one, I think there's 3 times in the Torah where that happens.
That is so cool. Because all the more, like, it's a different kind of midrash.
Right.
That if the trope or the music that goes with it changes, that happens a lot in there's different tropes for different things. So like when we did the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, for Rosh Hashanah, not for the year, not for a regular reading, it has a different trope. It has a high holiday trope. The Megillot, the book of Esther and Ruth and Ecclesiastes and the other ones, Song of Songs, Lamentations, they have different trope too. So it's a different kind of interpretation that the music would further give understanding of the text. Of course it does. Okay, let me show you this text. We'll go through it quickly. So I want to look at the actual Torah text and you'll show me where the idols are. All right. Now this is the line of Terah. This is the end of the the 11th chapter. And this is the one of Genesis. And this is where we're introduced to Abraham for the first time. Now this is the line of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran begot Lot. All right. That's your genealogy. Haran died in the lifetime of his father Terah in his native land, Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took to themselves wives, the name of Abram's wife being Sarai, and that of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and they set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. It's confusing because Haran is the name of the place and the name of the child. The days of Terah came to 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. God said to Abram, go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. Okay, so that's the famous Lech Lecha moment. All right, where are the idols? They're not there, right? It's nowhere. Nowhere. Okay, let's look at the text.
Yeah, but it doesn't even mention that his father is an idol maker, does it, in the Torah?
No. It doesn't. This is what the Torah says, what I just read. So you might look at the text and what are the questions the rabbis are asking? Is when you study Midrash, that is the first thing you have to ask the question is, what's the problem here?
Mm-hmm.
That's always the first question. Well, who is Terah? This is the line of Terah. Who's Terah? And why are we spending 4 verses talking about him, or 3 verses, four verses? Okay. What's important I think, is that Terach is Abram's father, and also Haran's father, because Haran's the father of Lot, right? Because Lot becomes important later on, right?
Yeah.
And the places they went are important. Ur of the Chaldeans, that's their starting ground. That's important. That they move on to another place called Haran. Interesting. This is where Sarai is introduced for the first time, and all these names. It's actually really important because we don't get a lot of names a lot. Remember, the text is very discrete in the information that it gives you, and we have to look around it to get more information. So this is the backstory. All right, we don't need to read the whole thing, but Genesis 11:28 says, and Haran died in the presence of his father Terach. Rabbi Hia said, Terach, who was Terach? Terach was a manufacturer of idols. He once went away somewhere and left Abraham to sell them in his place. So we would do that, right? I have to go run an errand. Son, can you just watch the store for me for a second? Sure, no problem, Dad. A man came in and wished to buy one. How old are you? Abraham asked the man. Funny question, but if you're a little kid, which he's not because he's married, you might ask somebody how old they are, but maybe they have different what's proper in those days. A man came in and wished to buy one. How old are you, Abraham? Asked the man. 50 years old. He said, woe to such a man who is 50 years old and would worship a day-old object. Okay. Avraham said, on another occasion, a woman came in with a plate full of flour and requested him, take this and offer it to them, like an offering, like a sacrificial offering. So he took a stick and broke them and put the stick in the hand of the largest. And when his father returned, he demanded, what have you done to them? I cannot conceal it from you. A woman came in with a plate full of meal, a fine meal, and requested me to offer it to them. One claimed, I must eat first, while another claimed, I must eat first. Thereupon the largest arose, took the stick, and broke them. Why do you make sport of me? Like, why are you making fun of me? Do they know anything? Do they have any knowledge? Terach said. Should not your ears hear what your mouth has said? Like, listen to yourself. That's ridiculous. Thereupon Terach seized him and delivered him to Nimrod. Let us worship fire. Okay, then we're going to skip all this because it's confusing. Confusing. You can read it on your own. Okay, it's all confusing. Basically, he says, how can you believe this, Mishigas? It's clay. And then Abraham says back to him, then why do you believe in idols if it's just clay? Like, why are you doing this? So that story, one that we teach our children, as if it's Torah, is not in the Torah. So it's not that it's not, I don't want you to think that we're just making up stories. We're making up stories for a greater purpose, right? Our stories explicate the text. So in this case, who was Terach? So we're getting the fact that he's an idol maker. Who is Abraham? Why Abraham? Why does Abraham become the father of the Jewish people, the father of a great nation? Why is Abraham and Sarah, why are they the ones who end up making a covenant with God and starting this whole Jewish thing, right? Because Abraham, according to this midrash, is the one who's willing to stand up and say, we're not going to worship idols anymore. That's why we teach this to our children. We don't worship idols. We worship God. And then, you know, that passage ends with the first chapter of the book of chapter 12 saying, Lech lecha ma'artzecha, leave your father's house. Not only is he leaving, there's a whole midrash too about why it says, leave your father's house, your homeland, the place where you, here, what is the actual text? It says, sorry. Go forth from your native land, from your father's house to the land that I will show you. Basically, from the place you're born, from everything, and it's a litany of places. And why? He's not just leaving. He's not just going forth to a new place. He's leaving behind the old way of thinking. the old way of worshiping. So he's starting fresh. So he's embarking on a journey, a new beginning, this covenant with God. And he's rejecting everything that came before. And the vision of like breaking idols and like smashing that way of life is a very powerful image. Because it's not even that like those idols still exist. I mean, they can be remade, but he like broke them to pieces because they're nothing, they're clay.
Mhm.
So the message from the Midrash is actually quite powerful. And the message is powerful, and it teaches us something about Abraham, his personality, and the family that he comes from. So anyway, so that's a really fun. I like that Midrash too. The language of the Torah is efficient. It rarely repeats itself, Ruth says. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, Marilyn?
Well, I was just thinking of one reason that that's such a good, it's important to have a midrash for young children, maybe even teenagers, is because the question is why would he want to leave his father? Didn't families like exist all together as a tribe? It wasn't just your parents, it was the whole extended family. So it's no small thing. So it, just take off and go. There
Right.
had to have been a really good reason that Abraham had to leave.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And a lot of these stories, they're we use them for children, but they're not really written for children. And I think the fact that they're actually written for us to
Right.
understand the text is important, because they may be like fable-like and feel like a fairy tale, but the reality is these are adult stories, just like frankly fairy tales are adult stories too. That
Right.
we make them so that we can teach our children these lessons, but they're actually, I think, for us. So what I like what Ruth said about the language of the Torah is efficient, it rarely repeats itself, is that, well, first of all, there's a lot of repetition in the Torah. And so when you get that repetition, you have to ask the question, why is this story repeating itself? So for example, when Abraham and Sarah go down to Egypt, the same story happens twice, and then again with Isaac and Rebekah. Why is that story told 3 times? One text that we're not going to have time to look at today, but we can look at it one of our other days, the stories of creation. Do you know there are 2 stories in the Bible of creation? A bunch of you are nodding your head yes. You're Torah scholars, But why do you need 2 stories of creation? Right? Like, what's the message that we're trying to get across? We'll look at that another time, but what's the message we're trying to get across that we need 2 stories? So repetition has its purpose. When it says in the text that we're going to look at right now, Avraham, when a word is repeated, that means something. Abraham, God really wants to get Abraham's attention there. All right. So these texts are the, creation ones, which if you take the link, feel free to go on the Sefaria page. Sefaria is this really wonderful text-based website, which allows you to take all texts from all across the textual tradition of Judaism and create your own sheets like this. So that's what I did with this. And this is there for you. It's you can only access it if you have the link. Okay. So many of you know that the next text, because I said Avraham, the next text is the story of Akedat Yitzhak, the binding of Isaac.
Mm-hmm.
All right. This text, books and libraries have been written about this text. Okay. And I want you, as we look through it, we only have a few minutes left, but as we look through it, I want you to start asking yourself, what questions trouble the rabbis here? Okay. What are the questions? Sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test. He said to him, Abraham, and he answered, here I am. And God said, take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. So early the next morning, Abraham saddled his ass and took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place which God had told him. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar. And then Abraham said to his servants, you stay here with the ass. The boys and I will go up there. The boy and I will go up there. We will worship and we will return to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. He himself took the firestone and the knife, and the two walked off together. And then Isaac said to his father Abraham, Father. And he answered, yes, my son. And he said, here are the firestone and the wood, but where's the sheep for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will see to the sheep for the burnt offering, my son. I lost my place. Sorry, you guys, I lost my place. Okay, here we go. And the two of them walked on together. They arrived at the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there, and he laid out the wood, and he bound his son Isaac, and he laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son. And then an angel of God called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. And he answered, here I am. And he said, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. When Abraham looked up, his eye fell upon a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham named that site Adonai Yireh, whence the present saying, on the mount of God there is vision. The angel of God called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I swear, God declares, because you have done this and not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessings upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands of the seashore, and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes. All the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants, because you have obeyed my command. Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together for Beersheba. Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Okay. What are the difficulties with this text?
A lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. So Karen wrote, is he right to have a favorite? Good question. There's a midrash on that. I'm just going to tell you there's a midrash on that each time, and then we'll come back. Okay, so there's a midrash on that.
Where is Sarah, the mother? Does she know
Where
that?
is Sarah? And that's their final question. So we're going to come back to that one, Marilyn. Yes. What other questions do you have for this text?
Why
Test.
did,
I said test, but it's also a test and a text. Okay.
why didn't the son protest more?
There's a midrash on that.
He wasn't a baby at this point. Or,
Right.
or
So
young.
there's a couple questions. There's a midrash on how old he is. There's a midrash on his reaction. Okay, so good questions. What other questions do you have of the text?
How could
Why doesn't-
Abraham possibly agree to do this in the first place?
There's a midrash on that.
How about this one? Isn't God being a little, isn't God
Sorry.
being a little sadistic too?
Yeah.
There's a midrash on that.
I think it's very cruel.
Is it blind faith or total
Right.
trust?
Ask him to do this to begin with.
Yep. And if God asked me to do that, I'd say, sorry, I'm out.
Gotta ask him.
Why would the story want to scare a child half to death to prove a point?
Right.
Good question. Good question. That one.
And
I'm
how many
also curious
times,
on that
how
one.
many times does God have to test Abraham?
There's a midrash on that.
What about
I'm
blind
recording
faith?
this so I can go back and listen to your questions. Okay, so what we've learned is that our questions are the same questions that the rabbis were asking, right? Like this story, it's a scary story, which by the way, we have fairy tales that are scary stories too, just saying. But it's a scary story and it really does ask a lot of questions. The first three words demand a question. After these things, the text says, what things are we talking about? Right? So, so like almost in these 19 verses, almost every section requires questions. And so that's why I said there are books and books and books written about this particular Torah portion. It's also the Torah portion we read on Rosh Hashanah. So, so it's clearly a really important portion to our tradition. And Marilyn asked the question that's relevant for us today. Where's Sarah in this story? So when I started studying text for the first time, this was the text that was presented to me. And that was the question that was asked of me. Where is Sarah? Never thought about that before, right? It's a story about Abraham and his son, but hello, there's a bigger family here. And so what is Sarah's reaction? Right? And so this is our transition to next week's class.
Nice.
I don't mean next week, I mean next Thursday, Thursday's class, because we're bringing in Rabbi Rachel Biermann. And she's a rabbi at Shari Emeth in St. Louis, which is where Rabbi Josh's brother is also a rabbi. So there's a nice little connection there. And I told you earlier that Rachel has been involved in this midrash writing project called Midrashic Monologues for several years. And she and her partner writer came up with a beautiful midrash on this. And I just want to introduce the concept of modern midrash. It was really started by the feminist movement within Judaism of rabbis who said, my voice is not being portrayed in the text. Right. So from time to time, there are women who are named, like we saw Milcah and Sarai earlier in that text. We have the matriarchs. We have Miriam. Moses' wife's name is Zipporah. Sorry, all of a sudden, I don't know where I came up with that. Zipporah. And, there are women throughout the text, but you don't hear from them very often. You don't hear their voices that often. And when you do, you know that it's something special. Here, Sarah's voice is totally absent. And so the question that we ask is, where is Sarah? And there are actually a few rabbinic midrashim on Sarah in this text, but not a lot. So I can't say there's no midrash on that. In some ways, I wish I could say there's no midrash on that. This is our place to fill the gap. There are a few, but it is still our place to fill that gap. And so as modern rabbis, men and women, we've tried to reclaim the voices that are absent in the Torah and to offer interpretation, midrash, on texts that may be relevant to our day. And so to make them meaningful to us in 2021, to be able to say that, so this text that, this ancient text that has been transmitted from generation to generation speaks to me and my situation. And what's so fun about it is an evolving text. I mean, this is something that we always talk about with Torah. These rabbis who were writing in 400 to 1200 with these midrash, that's still over 1,000 years since the Torah was transmitted, right? So for them to be interpreting text and writing commentary and creating stories in their day is not that much different than what we're doing. Right. So it's a logical outcome to be able to create midrash in our day. So there are just wonderful midrashim out there. And so Rachel's coming on Thursday, and she and I will talk to you about the concept of modern midrash. And what I would like for you to do, here's your homework. I want you to find a character or a story in the text that you like. Okay, you're not going to really do anything about that between now and Thursday, but I want you to start thinking about someone that you connect with in the text. Now, it could be a popular character like Abraham and Sarah, somebody who is, we'll just say famous, that there's a lot of text written about that person. Or it could be somebody whose name is mentioned one time and you really don't know anything about them. Or maybe it's not a person, it could be an event. Right? It could be the moment of giving the Torah at Sinai or the splitting of the sea, which happens to be this week, which would be a nice way to engage in that moment. So just pick your moment, your person, your experience. If you want to Google it, you can. Google's the new way of text study, and see what's written about it. And just kind of familiarize yourself a little bit with that moment. And then we'll learn from Rachel and me, and then we'll kind of try our hand at our own midrash. So how's that sound? Good?
Mhm.
Good. All right. Does anybody have any questions? What's your question? What's your difficulty? That's the question you always have to ask of the text. None? Really? Okay. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this time together. It's really nice to see you all and to be able
Marla,
to talk about
isn't
midrash.
there a midrash about Sarah getting so upset about the binding of Isaac that she dies?
Yeah. So there's a
Is that- is that
midrash.
Is that a midrash?
Yeah, it's a rabbinic midrash
It's a rabbinic one. Okay.
that so there's a couple of them. But so the next thing that happens is the Torah portion is called Haye Sarah, which means the life of Sarah. And the very first thing that happens in that Torah portion is that Sarah dies. And so the midrash is that
So
she hears about what happened or almost happened to Isaac, and she dies. In fact, there's this story. Somebody was saying, I have to go back and look at your questions, answer your questions that you had of the text. But one of them was like, how could God ask this of Abraham? And so one of the midrashim says that it was actually Satan or Samael, it's the name for Satan, and God are having a debate, an argument about what Abraham will do. And so this is a test about if Abraham would do this. And so Samael goes to Sarah and tells her, this is in the Midrash, tells her what has happened. And before this Satan character actually gets to tell her that Abraham's okay, her spirit flies from her and she dies. Like, she's so upset by this. So that was how the rabbis imagined it. And just so you know, Samael is not a Satan character with, like, you know, horns and a fire stick and all of that, the way we would imagine him in our modern day. He's more of an adversary to God. So I was always taught that Samael was the prosecutor in a court of law where God was the defense attorney. So think of it that way.
That's so interesting. The only other time that I know that Satan is brought in as sort of a quasi explanation or a vehicle to answer a question is with Job. So Sarah and Job.
So Samael shows up in Midrash and Talmud and different places throughout. That would be an interesting study sometime.
And I thought I heard that Sarah followed him there.
Okay, so I mentioned that in a class that we did, and that was a modern Midrash.
Okay.
That Rachel's writing partner wrote.
Okay. Okay.
So she can tell us a little bit about that on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes it's hard to differentiate between the Torah text and the commentaries and the Midrash and the codes and everything that comes after. But, you know, one thing our tradition teaches us is that all of it, including the modern Midrash that we're writing, is part of the Torah, right? This is all part of the Torah that we've been given. And so it doesn't matter when it was written, but it's an evolving text. And so I think that's important too.
So are there like midrashim that we would not be aware of? Like, for example, an ultra Orthodox sect, you know, in Judaism that would have their own midrashim that we would not be exposed to or even know about? Oops, I just lost you.
I don't know how to answer that. There's so much midrash out there, you really couldn't even read it all. I mean, just the basic midrash rabbah is volumes and volumes and volumes.
Yeah.
Does each like sect of Judaism have their own? No, it's just part of the genre of Jewish text.
Can I ask you, did you read that it said, Abraham said, when we will return?
Yeah.
So it's that could have been a signal to the sun, we're coming back. We have to go through, I'm just saying, I never
We have
heard
to look at that.
I never heard of the we will return. That would mean something. It would be
yeah, I have to look at the actual Hebrew on that one. So, okay, you guys, write your questions down. The fun part of this is that we get to see each other again on Thursday at noon. I am going to be running to get back to my computer. So if I'm just a minute late, wait for me, but it should be back in time.